Someone asked, how do you battle with your understanding of science versus your want for faith? And I stared at that question for a while, because for years I thought it was a battle, that I had to pick a side, be rational or be religious, trust evidence or trust feelings. It turned out the battle was never between science and faith. It was between my pride and admitting I needed something beyond data. I'm Brogan, and this is Faith in Progress. To unpack the problem, this is why it feels impossible. You've been told your whole life that science and faith are enemies, that smart people follow evidence and religious people follow comfort. That if you accept evolution, cosmology, neuroscience, all of these fields that explain how things work, then believing in God is intellectual suicide. I felt this constantly. I'd learn about the universe, about how life emerged, about how our brains created consciousness, and it all seemed to work without needing God in the equation. So when I felt that pull towards my faith, my brain would immediately fire back. You can't believe that, or you know better. It felt like I had to choose head or heart, logic or God. Let me give you the arguments I used to make, the ones that kept me from faith for years, because they're real arguments and they deserve to be taken seriously. The first one: science explains everything we used to attribute to God. We used to think God made lightning, controlled the weather, caused disease, then science showed us electricity, meteorology, germ theory. Every time we learnt more, God's territory got smaller. So why wouldn't consciousness, morality, and existence itself eventually get explained too? See, God has always been the answer to what we don't understand yet. It's just a placeholder for ignorance. Argument 2. Evolution shows we weren't designed. If God designed humans, why are we so badly put together? Our eyes have blind spots, our spines aren't built for upright walking, we have an appendix that does absolutely nothing but occasionally try to kill us. Evolution by natural selection explains all of this perfectly. We're not designed. We're jury-rigged by millions of years of trial and error. Design implies the designer, but we see all the marks of a process with no goal, no plan, just survival. Argument 3. The universe doesn't need God to exist. See, the Big Bang happened. The universe expanded. Stars formed, planets cooled, life emerged from chemistry. Consciousness arose from neural complexity. Where in any of that do you need God? See, Stephen Hawking said, the universe can create itself from nothing because of quantum mechanics and gravity. You don't need a divine spark. The laws of physics are enough. Argument 4. Neuroscience shows God is just brain chemistry. See, when people have religious experiences, we can see what's happening in their brains, specific neural patterns, chemical releases. We can even trigger spiritual experiences artificially, with drugs or by stimulating certain brain regions. If encountering God is just your temporal lobe firing in a certain way, then God is just an illusion. A coping mechanism, an evolutionary advantage that helped early humans survive by creating social cohesion. See argument 5. Belief correlates with ignorance. The more educated people become less and less religious. They tend to be. The most scientific advanced countries are the least religious. The correlation is clear. Education leads away from faith. If God were real, wouldn't the opposite be true? Wouldn't deeper understanding lead you to God, not away from him? These arguments felt airtight to me, and honestly, they're still good arguments. I'm not going to pretend they're stupid or easy to dismiss. They kept me from faith for years for a reason. When I started actually exploring faith, these arguments haunted me. I'm someone who researches everything. I can't just feel my way into belief without making sense logically. And what I knew about reality came from science. But then I realized something. The conflict wasn't between science and faith. It was between my pride and my need for something science couldn't give me. I had turned science into my religion. It made me feel smart. It gave me answers to how questions, and I used those questions to avoid the bigger, harder ones. Things like, why does anything exist at all? Why does consciousness matter? And where does morality come from if we're just evolved animals? Science is incredible at explaining mechanisms, but it can't tell you why those mechanisms exist, or what you should do with the life those mechanisms created. So let me respond to those arguments, not because I have perfect answers, but because I've wrestled with them honestly. For the first argument, God of the gaps versus God of the whole picture. Yes, we used to attribute lightning to God, and now we know it's electricity. But that assumes God is only relevant where we don't have scientific explanation. That's not the Christian view. Christians don't say God made lightning by magic. They say God designed the laws of physics that produce lightning. Science discovering how something works doesn't eliminate God. It reveals the mechanisms he used. When I understand how my computer works, with circuits and processors and code, that doesn't mean no one designed or built it. Understanding the mechanism doesn't eliminate the need for an engineer. The better I understand the universe complexity, the more I'm confronted with the question, where did these precise laws come from? Why do they exist instead of nothing? Science explains the how, it can't explain the why there's something to explain. Response 2. Bad design versus design for a purpose. The bad design argument assumes that if God designed us, we should be perfect machines. But Christianity doesn't claim we're perfect, it claims we're fallen. Designed for one purpose and now operating in corrupt conditions. It's like saying this sports car has terrible off-road capability, so it must not be designed. Maybe it's designed for something other than what you're judging it by. But here's the deeper response. Evolution doesn't actually eliminate design. It could be the mechanism God used. The Bible says God formed humans. It doesn't specify whether he did that instantaneously or for a 4 billion year process. Most Christians throughout history have read Genesis as theological truth, not a specific timeline. Augustine, in the 4th century, warned against reading creation as literal days. Evolution describes a process. It doesn't answer whether that process was intentional. Response 3. The universe creating itself is still something from nothing. Hawkins said that the universe can create itself because of quantum mechanics and gravity. But where did quantum mechanics come from? Where did gravity come from? Where did the laws that allow something from nothing come from? You haven't eliminated the need for God. You've just pushed the question back one step. And this is what got me. The universe didn't have to be something we could understand. It didn't have to follow laws that our minds could understand. The fact that maths, something humans invented, accurately describes physical reality is just bizarre. Einstein called it the eternal mystery of the world. Why should the universe be understandable to us? The atheist scientists have to accept that is just a lucky coincidence. The Christians say because a rational mind designed it to be understood by rational minds, made in his image. Response 4. Brain chemistry doesn't prove God is an illusion. Yes, we can see neural activity during religious experiences, and we can trigger similar feelings with drugs or brain stimulation, but that doesn't prove God is fake. It proves we're physical beings who encounter non-physical reality through physical brains. Of course, here's the brain's activity when you encounter God. There's brain activity when you encounter love, beauty, truth, or your parents. That doesn't make those things illusions. If God created us with brains, wouldn't he design those brains to be capable of perceiving him? Neuroscience shows us the mechanisms of religious experience. It doesn't tell us whether the experience corresponds to something real beyond the brain. You can't use brain scans to determine if God exists any more than you can use them to determine if your thoughts about maths are true or false. Response 5. The education correlation doesn't prove what you think. Yes, higher education correlates with lower religious beliefs in many Western contexts, but that's just a sociological observation. It's not proof that education reveals faith as false. It could just as easily show that academic culture is hostile to faith, that educated people face social pressure to conform to secular consumptions, or that universities select for and reinforce certain worldviews. And here's the thing, many of the most educated people in history and today are Christians. Francis Collins led the Human Genome Project. John Polkinghorne was a Cambridge physicist. Alistair McGrath has doctorates in molecular biophysics and theology. These aren't people who chose faith because they didn't know better. They chose it because their deep knowledge led them there. The correlation might show that faith gets harder when you're surrounded by people who dismiss it, but difficulty doesn't equal falsehood. But all of this, these arguments back and forth, they miss the real point. Because these questions were never, can I find arguments for God that satisfy my intellect? The question was, what if the universe is more than a machine? What if I'm more than a collection of chemicals and cells? What if meaning and morality and consciousness point to something beyond the physical? Science can tell me that my sense of morality evolved to increase my survival, but it can't tell me whether I should act morally. It can describe the neural correlations of love, but it can't tell me whether love matters, or is it just a useful delusion? I can explain how my brain constructs meaning, but it can't tell me if any meaning is actually true. I spent years thinking I had to choose between my intellect and my need for meaning. And then I realized, what if the need for meaning isn't a bug? What if it's a feature? What if I'm designed to seek something beyond survival, beyond chemicals, and beyond mechanisms? Because that's the most important thing about being human. So here's some practical guidance. First, stop treating them as enemies. Science is a tool for understanding how the natural world works. It's brilliant at that, but it can't answer questions about meaning, purpose, or what exists beyond the physical. Those aren't science questions. Asking science to prove or disprove God is like asking a calculator to write poetry. It's the wrong tool for the job. I had to realize I was making a category error. Science studies the natural world using natural methods. God, by definition, would be supernatural. You can't use natural methods to prove or disprove something supernatural any more than you can use a metal detector to find emotions. The tool isn't designed for that. Second, you need to realize that you're not alone in this. Francis Collins led the Human Genome Project and is a devout Christian. He wrote a whole book about it, called The Language of God. John Polkinghorne was a physicist who became a priest, and Alistair McGrath was an atheist scientist who became a Christian theologian. Thousands of working scientists see no conflict between their work and their faith. If they can hold both, so can you, and they're not doing it by being intellectually dishonest. They're doing it by recognizing that science and faith answer different questions. Third, get comfortable with mystery. Science doesn't have all the answers either. We don't know why there's something instead of nothing. We don't fully understand consciousness. It's the hard problem that stumps neuroscientists. We don't know why the universe has the exact constants it does that allows life to change. If you mess around with any of them by a fraction of a percent, then the universe is sterile. Scientists say we don't know yet, all the time, and that's honest. Faith asks you to say, I may never fully understand, but that's okay. Both require humility. The difference is, science believes future discoveries will fill the gaps, while faith believes some questions are meant to point us beyond what can be measured. Fourth, you need to test both worldviews against reality. Here's what shifted me. I started asking which worldview actually makes sense, based off of what I experience. Atheist materialism says consciousness is an illusion. Free will doesn't exist, morality is just evolved preference, meaning is just something we invent, and love is just chemistry. And yet I've experienced all of those things as real and very significant. Christianity says consciousness is real because you're made in the image of a conscious God. Morality is real because it's grounded in God's nature. Meaning is real because you're a part of a larger story. Love is real because love is God's nature. Which worldview takes my actual lived experience seriously? I can't prove that God exists the way I prove 2 + 2 = 4. But I also can't prove my loved ones aren't philosophical zombies with no inner experience. and I can't prove I'm not a brain in a vat. We live by faith in many things that we can't prove all the time. The question is, which unprovable foundation makes the most sense? For me, a universe with intention behind it makes more sense than a universe of blind chance. A moral law makes more sense than evolved preferences pretending to be objective. Consciousness as fundamental rather than emergent makes more sense, and that doesn't mean I can prove it. It means I'm willing to follow where there's evidence, both scientific and philosophical. Look, I still value logic. I still care about evidence. I haven't abandoned my brain to believe in God, and if anything, the more that I learn, the more I see things that make sense with a designer behind them. I just realized I was holding faith to a higher standard than I held anything else. I wanted absolute proof before I believed in God, but I don't have absolute proof that other minds exist, or that the world is real, or that my reasoning is reliable. I accept all of those on much less evidence because they make sense of my experience. When I apply the same standard to faith, does this make sense of reality? Does it cohere with what I know? Does it explain my experience better than alternatives? Christianity held up, not with certainty, with plausibility, with coherence, with explanatory power. If you're wrestling with this, feeling pulled towards faith but worried it means abandoning reason, you are not alone. And you don't have to choose. Some of the smartest people in history didn't. They found that following the evidence where it leads sometimes means accepting that not everything that's real can be measured in a lab. The question isn't science or faith, it's does the scientific picture of reality exhaust what's real, or is there more? And I've come to believe there's more. Not despite science, but informed by it. If this resonates, or you have your own thoughts on this, I'd love to hear it. Let's keep the conversation going. Thanks for listening. I'm Brogan, and this is Faith in Progress.